We have an online open portal with a range of resources, and we do offer an advisory service. So if you feel that you could benefit from some advice about using or creating your own evidence, please feel free to give us a call. Free subscription to a monthly newsletter will keep you in touch with what our latest happenings and events are. And you can go online and provide your name, just in case you don't know. Let me introduce Eleanor. Eleanor is the Director of the Centre for Evaluation and Research Evidence at the Department of Health and Human Services. In this role, she leads the department's evaluation and research strategy and is the co-convener for the Victorian and Australian Public Sector Evaluation Network. So keep that one in if you're a government person. Eleanor is currently redeployed to the Victorian Government's COVID policy response. Thank you, Eleanor, very much for jumping in, and over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mandy. I think it's interesting. I'm sure actually seeing the title of Michele's presentation and other, I think there's lots of us working in the same space of really trying to understand what's changed during this period where we've had to so quickly adapt our services and practices. So today I'm going to present on a bit of some work we've been doing, a stream of work called Rapid Evaluations. And one of the things we've looked at is a number of evidence-based programs and the common elements approach. Now, I've just got to work out if I can make this go to the next one. I'm sure I can. Let's see. There we go. So I thought I'd start just by fleshing out exactly which programs we looked at. I haven't gone back. I did wonder if I actually probably needed an initial slide which said, so what are the evidence-based programs and common elements? I will do a briefer summary. I think with this audience, there'll be a lot of people who are familiar with these programs, but I'm conscious they're not universally used. So the evidence-based programs are the manualised programs, and we've got some examples there: Safe Care, Family Functional Therapy, Family Foundations. So the programs which come effectively ready-built, often from America, but increasingly there's some being developed in Australia and in the UK. And they're kind of useful programs because they have already been through a series of trials, usually randomised controlled trials, to kind of understand what the impact is with different cohorts. There's a series of funded trials from the Victorian government at the moment with evidence-based programs, but also New South Wales has invested heavily, as well as some of the other states. Now, the Common Elements trial, this is a more innovative program that does come out of Victoria, and this is a program of work which says across these evidence-based programs is often kind of modules of practice, like motivational interviewing and some of those techniques which are common across multiple programs. And what we're trialling now is if we apply those common elements into our general practice in children and family services, trying to understand their impact as compared to evidence-based programs. And the idea is, rather than always investing in evidence-based programs, it's possible we could think about training our workforce around the common elements rather than investing in the manualised programs which have ongoing licensing costs, training costs related to their providers. So that's the two things: evidence-based programs and common elements. We worked with 7 agencies to have a look at what they've been doing. So I've listed them there: Michele, Anglicare, Kids First, Merry Health, VACA, Auschchild and Berry Street. And I can see lots of those organisations are represented here today. And I'll go into a little bit more about exactly what we did, but effectively we worked with them to, in this case, to undertake a literature review, semi-structured interviews, and do some reporting on what's happening. So I know that for those working on smaller screens, this will seem a bit small, so I'll talk through it a little bit. I just want to do a quick summary of what we're trying to achieve, what questions we're trying to answer, and how will we assess. So in terms of what we're trying to achieve, they're called rapid evaluations, but they're not necessarily, these are very much about sort of almost a developmental format. So not summative. We're not trying to say, is this good or bad in terms of practice, but trying to capture the innovation and changes to practices and services that are emerging from the COVID-19, particularly the physical distancing measures. So where you've had to move to remote delivery. And it's really trying to provide an opportunity to describe and assess those changes, and particularly try and think about the benefits of remote delivery. And this is about informing decision making. So going forward, we know at some point for a lot of our children and family services, we'll want to move them back face to face. We're trying to understand of the service and practice changes that have emerged, are there some positive things? Are there some things you'd want to keep going forward? So the questions are very much aligned to that. So we were trying to understand what services are doing differently, what are the impacts of these changes, and for evaluators or an evaluation audience, impacts actually is a pretty loaded term which has a specific meaning. But in this case, we're talking more about the plain language description of impact, how does this feel for service users? How does it feel for service providers? What's it doing in terms of the costs? What's it doing in terms of the change of who you can access? And as I said, we're particularly trying to understand are there aspects that we could be kept or extended going forward when you're trying to start moving back into more of a business as usual service delivery model. And in terms of how will we assess, we were looking at a number of aspects, and these are common across multiple rapid evaluations that we're doing. So we're trying to understand, as I said, the measurable impacts and outcomes, recognizing we're talking about a very short period of time that we're looking at. Anything around reduced risk or increased safety. Trying to pick up, is there some positive out here that we could take forward because of that element? Increased efficiency or cost effectiveness. Empowerment and flexibility for frontline staff, understanding if there are some aspects of this model that really work for staff. Increased empowerment for partners community, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And trying to understand the client service experience. As you see, this is all pitched in the positive, because we're particularly trying to say, look, where it's working badly, we anticipate that as soon as you can change back to normal, you will. But where we're seeing positive things that are working better for people, what should we try and keep forward? So that's why it's all framed in this positive. And then we're thinking about the ability to be sustained or scaled up. So that's the sort of framing that we came in with. It's very positive. Like if you think about the critical eye that we usually take through evaluations, there's a very positive lens to try and say, this is a difficult time. We've made a lot of changes. Is there something good we want to capture? Now, in terms of process, I just wanted to give a quick picture of what we did. And these are 4 to 6 week projects. So very, very brief in the world of evaluation, where usually we say projects need to be 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. This is very much truncated. And it's almost just like a mini version of the longer project. So we start off with a document review. We try to see where services have put out information to say, how are we going to change? What are we doing differently on paper? We did a very high level intervention logic, just trying to map out when you changed, what were you trying to achieve when you moved to remote delivery? We did some data collection and analysis, particularly where the data was available. In this case, we relied very, very heavily on stakeholder input. So it was working across those 7 agencies to try and find all the people who could provide some insights into what's happening on the ground. Now for this particular project, this slide is actually a generic slide about the approach we take to all our rapid evaluations. We didn't do a case study in this one. Partly that was because we were talking multiple different services in multiple locations with multiple cohorts. So we felt the case study model was only going to capture one tiny part of the puzzle. And I'll show you some other examples of rapid evaluations we've done where this makes more sense, where a case study element is really critical. And then reporting. And I think it's funny when I look back at this diagram, and we've sort of got it marked out like reporting is a week and a half. Certainly we drafted up the reports in a week and a half, but if you think about all the back and forth that comes afterwards, there's probably another 3 weeks on the back end of this project. So while we say 4 to 6 weeks, they generally blow out to about 8 weeks once you get through we've written it up. Is this right? Are we capturing this accurately? There needs to be a bit more time at the back end. So these slides were written at a time where we just completed the first 3, but we're now almost through the first 8 of the rapid evaluations. To give you a sense of the other things we're looking at, we've looked at use of telehealth for perinatal services. And in that case, the case study's been really, really critical. We worked with the Courier Maternity Service to really unpack how you can do a high quality perinatal service when you can't be physically in the room with the woman with the pregnant woman who really wants to talk through their birth plan and build that relationship with the practitioner. We also looked at homelessness, so the temporary extension of the Housing Establishment Fund. And I know for a lot of organisations here, you also work across homelessness, and that one may also be of interest. But today I'm just particularly talking about children and families, so where we looked at the move from face-to-face to remote delivery for EBPs and the common element approach. So today I'm doing, this is the very rapid fire version of the findings, the rapid findings from the rapid evaluations. So I'll jump straight into some of the things that we saw. And as I said, they were particularly framed around what's working well. And I guess one of the things that really jumped out on this one was the incredible speed of implementation. So I think for a sector that if you had have asked 12 months ago, could you move all your services at least partially online within a 1 to 2 month period? Everyone would have said that's absolutely impossible. Our infrastructure is not there. Our people aren't trained. We couldn't possibly do it, but we did. And that's the whole sector has been incredibly quick, agile and responsive and able to step up so quickly. And particularly there's been really clever and thoughtful adaptations to remote delivery. And we know that's not on any one agency. There's been incredibly strong collaboration between agencies and program purveyors and implementation advisors to thoughtfully and quickly draw on the evidence that's out there in the world to try and do this well. So I think it's just such an incredible testament to the work of the sector. In terms of service continuity, we also achieved very, very high service continuity. I think in the early days, there's a real nervousness that what was going to happen is services would be transferred from face-to-face to remote, and half the people would drop off. That was a concern and a worry that was sitting in the background, but actually the service continuity has been very high, and most people who are receiving a service before are still receiving a service. We did note that a lot of the input we got is that remote delivery works for some programs better than others. For instance, some of the group-based programs like Tuning Into Kids, it's been really positive and quite easy to adapt, and the engagement's really strong. With others which have a more therapeutic approach or really rely on that risk assessment, it can be a lot harder. So things that are usually delivered in the home can be a real challenge trying to get the same level of kind of therapeutic benefit through the remote delivery. And again, focusing on the positive side of things, there've been some access improvements. So what we saw was where we had some people who had specific geographic barriers or transport issues, and people who didn't usually make it to appointments or get to a place, the group programs, you're seeing higher attendance at those group programs, for instance. And also we've heard some reported increases in participation of hard to engage service users, and particularly fathers in programs. So where often dad wasn't around, dad is now at home, either working from home or not working. And so there's been some increase in participation, but we haven't quantified that. So we haven't gone back to actually get the numbers on what proportion increased, but that's what was provided through the qualitative input. And then some of the challenges, as I said, we didn't focus a lot on the challenges, but they do come through. And I think some of these feel very intuitive. So in terms of safety and risk, I guess we had the concern that people talked about being unable to hold a safe space for families in remote environments. So they're lacking the visual cues and hard to read the room, sort of know when things are happening. And I think this was, again, a concern that's probably played out more in practice, which is hard to have difficult conversation. It's hard to assess emotional and physical safety. So you're talking to someone, a perpetrator might be in the next room, or they don't want to talk openly because the kids are just here. All those things have been a challenge that has played out. For practitioners, I think a very strong message, and I'm sure everyone can empathise with this. Practitioners reporting feeling both exhausted and overstimulated from all the screen time. You know, it's a real change of practice for everybody, and I think that's something which would be an unsurprising finding, I guess. They also indicated it's more difficult to establish relationships with families through remote platforms, and that's true across many service settings. We've heard that through a lot of different rapid evaluations. And I think that leads you to, and I'm hoping maybe some others today might be talking a bit more about some of the innovative models that have been designed and increasingly being designed to overcome that, which might be about trying to get a physically distanced face-to-face meeting at the front end, and then maybe you can move to virtual meetings after that. But the relationship building is particularly hard through these mechanisms. And for families, we've got those standard problems of access to technology. This all relies on having good internet connection, good tech, you know, even in some places just the electrical connections and enough PowerPoints and charged up devices to be doing these things, and a safe private place within the home. So small homes aren't good for private conversations. I think we've all learned that the hard way over this period. And then some lesson learned and where to from here. So I guess I think we're very keen to put right at the front, all these findings are from a limited sample of evidence-based programs and approaches in a very short period of observation. So they're not saying these are meant to be kind of indicative findings that help inform planning and thinking from here. But we know they're not generalizable across all services and clients, and it's worthy of deeper dives into specific programs. I guess particularly for this one, we have some other areas, like with perinatal health, we actually think for some of those appointments which don't have any hands-on connection with the parents, you could actually just keep video conferencing as a standard. Like we actually have listed out particular appointments that could be done as remote delivery forever. I guess with children and family services, we'd probably be saying as much as possible, you want to get things back to face-to-face as soon as you can. They're just the sort of services that are better when you can have that contact. However, in the case that it's a bit longer until we can do that, but more if we do flip back some, we think there's an opportunity for remote delivery to be an adjunct rather than a replacement. So rather than saying, you know what, we've learned how to do remote delivery, we'll just change all our programs to remote delivery. It could be that if you've got someone repeatedly not attending appointments or unable to get there because they're transport or caring responsibilities, now that we've learned how to do this, we could retain remote delivery as an adjunct, like as a substitute in specific circumstances. We're particularly keen, we didn't do a deep dive into the innovative mixed models, including both physically distanced and remote delivery elements, and we think that there's definitely more to be looked at there. And we know that it can be feasible. We know people are out there doing it and it's working well. And we do think that ongoing access capacity to deliver services remotely could be helpful. So, you know, 1 million iPads have been purchased during this this phase, and we think making sure we can retain it to, as we said, making up for missed face-to-face appointments, between appointment check-ins, reaching out to clients who look like they're disengaging. There's a big opportunity through the remote delivery there. And we think there'd be value in establishing some more kind of structured trials to build the evidence base on remote delivery. But that, I guess, this is just to try and get a snapshot and give an initial perspective. And look, I'm not expecting you to read this slide. This is actually a summary of the previous 3 slides, but I was actually trying to highlight the method, the thinking that goes behind the method we used. And this is a pretty standard developmental evaluation approach where you say, what, so what next? We've labeled them slightly differently, but it's the what happened, what impact did it have, and what should we do next? It's just a high level continuous learning cycle approach. And we're keen, you know, we think that this actually has a chance to have legs. There's, I guess we're still doing some work to kind of build out this method and describe how it can be used, particularly if you've got short periods of decision making. If you need to get to the decisions more quickly, you know, the board's making a call in 2 months' time. These methods can actually be really effective at getting you some fast insights that can inform decision making with a bit of structure and a bit of robustness to them, but without making it impossible. You know, it's an achievable kind of method to use if you've got fast decisions to be made. And then finally, I thought you might be interested. We're starting to pick up some cross-cutting findings, which we're testing with our second tranche of rapid evaluations now. These are really early findings that we've sort of tested across project teams and trying to think about, well, what does this tell us across broader service delivery, not just the EBPs themselves? So broadly, we think video conference delivery is superior to telephone-based services because you still are able to pick up some of those visual cues. You can pick up if someone rolls their eyes at you, you'll spot it. But interestingly enough, almost as soon as we'd formed up these findings, I was speaking to RMIT and VCOS, who are doing a sort of parallel piece of work, which is in the same sort of space. And they said, we're hearing some initial views that telephone-based services are superior to video conference. And when we dug in a little bit further, they'd started off by talking to some services delivered to an older cohort. And it was actually, they'd looked at particularly drug and alcohol services. And for older cohorts in drug and alcohol services, they much prefer phone. I think that just the challenge and of the technical aspect was proving difficult for their service users, so telephone was better. So that's definitely, it seems to be a broad finding, but it's not for everyone. And particularly telephone-based services are more appropriate for transactional interactions, and that's probably no surprise, but no one minds doing a phone booking for an appointment or exchanging basic information. It's much quicker and easier. But when it comes to a really in-depth or a therapeutic discussion, they'd prefer video, is what we're hearing. In terms of cohort, again, this will be quite intuitive. Remote delivery seems best suited to low-risk clients. So where you've, particularly what we're hearing, is very hard to do risk screening for mental health or family violence over the telephone. You just miss some of the key factors that tell you how serious the situation and what you're dealing with. So I guess if you're thinking about starting to transition clients back into face-to-face, we'd say you should prioritise the highest risk, particularly around mental health and family violence issues. And we did note, and this is across multiple services again, the service flexibility is most valued by those with competing responsibilities. So what we're hearing is parents with lots of kids really valued finally having access to remote delivery, particularly across a lot of services where people had said it just can't be done, you'll need to come in. The fact that we've kind of overcome that and said, look, there will be situations where we can meet your needs using a remote delivery is a big deal for people who've got a lot of caring responsibilities and just can't get out. And similarly, services in rural regional areas benefit most from reduced travel time. So we're hearing in some areas, all of a sudden people who are told, well, you'll have to travel an hour and a half to get to the service have finally been given the chance to do it remotely. So there's some big leaps and bounds on that front. And the last one's just an interesting one. So we've seen some incredible things, look, and it didn't come through so much in this rapid review, but in the Housing Establishment Fund, we heard there's been some incredible service connections created, because a lot of things, again, which used to be, well, we're trying to get everyone in a room, these people are only on the city on certain days, we can't get these services to talk to each other, have just so quickly been overcome in these last 6 months. So what this final point is to say is, we've created the opportunity for better service connections, but they're limited. We're still working on a place basis for a lot of services. So if there isn't a service existing, you know, we've got big parts of the state that really have some gaps in things like mental health and family violence services. It's the ability to build these service connections is still limited by which services exist in which locations. And hopefully, you know, if you think about a very big picture, longer term situation where possibly a service in Mildura could service somebody in East Gippsland, we've got the opportunity to change that, but I think we're on the start of a very long journey of you know, adjustment and transition into a situation where place doesn't matter so much about your access to services. So there's a big opportunity there, but it's not playing out yet while we're still on geographic boundaries for what you can access. So that was all. I know it's a very quick kind of race through all the findings, but I'm more than happy to take questions or hand over to Michele to run her presentation, and we can take some questions after.
Yeah, that would probably be great, because we do have Michele back, and then perhaps we can have questions for both of you after that, if that's okay. Great.
Thank you very much. Hopefully my internet connection lasts. Can you hear me, Mandy?
I can, and I'm just putting is your presentation up now?
Yes, thank you.
No worries.
And thank you, Eleanor, too. There are a lot of similarities in terms of findings and themes, but interestingly, there are also some differences. And I think it is such a nuanced area in relation to which remote platforms suit which people at which time, because even during the pandemic, over time, people's preferences have changed, and it's been hard to kind of pick out a pattern. So like we were hearing from some agencies, for example, that early on, young people just loved the video connections. And then as the pandemic wore on, for some of those young people, they didn't want that. The phone connection was enough. And that some people just got sick of seeing themselves, or they just wanted to get more control back. And so the control, they were enabled through a phone call rather than a video. So it really is nuanced, like quite interesting. I did start to say, when I did have internet connection the first time, I did start to say about the Aboriginal Children's Forum, the data that is presented there, very comprehensive quantitative data, and it's used for the purpose of holding CSOs and government accountable, and it's very important data. The data that we're presenting is a little bit different again from Eleanor's rapid evaluation data. This is very much about experiences on the ground. So it's about the experiences of clients as reported by you, by Child and Family Services, but also the experiences of practitioners and the experiences of agencies as a whole. And one of the reasons for trying to capture those experiences was to be able to feed that back into the sector, so people get that rapid information back to them in order to inform their own decision making. But funnily enough, some people have said it's really helped them not feel as isolated, because they can see that other organisations are having very similar challenges. There are similar issues with worker wellbeing. They're interested in how other organisations are managing that worker wellbeing. So it does help people feel a bit less isolated, but importantly, it's about sharing good practice. So what is evidently good practice? What we do, just like Eleanor has said, what do we want to keep and sustain over the next few years? So we captured data at 2 points in the pandemic, and it's been interesting to compare those. The first lot of data we collected was in March to June. So kind of the first stage of the pandemic, or we're calling it the first wave. And then the second wave was from July, August, and very intensive. And so I'm just reporting very briefly on the first wave, because we have released a report released last month, and most people, if you haven't seen it, we're very happy to give you access to that. Just three key things that we learned from that first wave. So there was a very strong focus at the very beginning on economic hardship and the pragmatic responses, like the material aid that families needed. It wasn't so much then, although that gradually came into being as well. The social isolation wasn't as pronounced at that very early part of the pandemic. And so families needed emergency relief. They needed food, petrol vouchers, basic grocery items. Because when remote learning started, they need technology for children's learning. And some of that came from DET, but a lot of it came from our agencies, Child and Family Services. The practitioners adopted creative case management strategies. So that was evident very early on. They did try, like a lot of agencies tried to maintain face-to-face for as long as they could, even though PPE wasn't available at that time. And so they found creative ways of managing that face-to-face using social distancing, for example, or meeting in parks, meeting in external environments. But then they also did use technology. They posted information to families, like resources to families, increasingly games and learning resources, learning materials for children. They gave families data packs, and they also advocated very strongly for children. So particularly when other services seemed to step back. For example, when schools were no longer open for every child, our agencies stepped up. Our practitioners were advocating very strongly for children with that were at high risk, or where schools were safe places, and making sure that those children could be supported physically in a physical space. And the same with childcare. The agencies, as Eleanor has pointed out very strongly, agencies adapted very quickly. We also, as well as the survey that we sent out, we also interviewed a number of CEOs. They were very proud of the fact that they could turn around very quickly their capability and technology. And one of them said to us, we're 2 years ahead of where we would have been without COVID. Like, we were able to bring forward our technology capability in such a short time. They set up COVID-specific response teams, some of them set up COVID-specific frameworks. They were able to set staff up to work remotely very quickly, and they moved to virtual service delivery, as Eleanor pointed out, very quickly. So that was from the first wave. If we go to the next wave. Thank you, Mandy. The photo we had for the first wave that we put in, that was almost nostalgic, because at the very start of the pandemic, it's kind of, they were almost the good old days when you look back and you think of people stockpiling toilet paper, and how that's changed, how people's concerns have changed, how mental wellbeing's changed, like changes not only for clients, but for workers, for their families, for people in government that are trying to provide a COVID response. So it's become much more sober. For this second wave, what we did for data collection, we did one survey that went out through the Child First and IFS alliances, and that meant that the data we got back wasn't as distributed, like, it was much more consolidated. So it's been much easier to work with, and it's been very interesting to see how it differs from alliance to alliance, region to region. So this is what people are saying about the client experience that people are reporting back, that the vulnerability of families and the complexity of issues has increased over the course of the pandemic. People are showing in under stage 4 in Melbourne, but stage 3 in regional Victoria, people are showing increased strain. Like, all of this, I think Eleanor used the word intuitive, and it is. You would expect this. People are struggling with mental health. There's a loss of motivation, loss of hope for many families. They're more disconnected from community than they were in the first wave. There's been a decline in mental health for children and young people, particularly as their opportunities to socialise, are increasingly limited. There's been, and it's been in the media as well, reported increased violence in the home, increased risk to children. We've heard of increased aggression by young people, like by adolescents. But it's hard to get the exact quantitative sense of that. This is very impressionistic, like it's agencies reporting back, this is what we're finding with the clients that we're working with. There've been reduced developmental opportunities for children, and even in the media this week, that's been raised again, like, what does the long-term, what's the long-term impact of these lost developmental opportunities for children? We have a couple of staff at the centre who have young babies and young children, and they're already talking about their concern, because those babies and young children, those toddlers, are not being exposed to the sorts of interactions and learning opportunities that they might have had previously. And that's the same for the families that our agencies work with. There's also a greater sense of isolation, reduced avenues to support for families. And this was so interesting, I think, and you will know this, that some parents are reporting increased anxiety from and susceptibility to conspiracy theories. So as social media has ramped up and the vileness and the cesspit has ramped up, this is affecting not only workers and families and the community, but families are saying, parents are saying, it's more difficult to resist that, to be like not going into that vortex of despair and it's a conspiracy. And also that leads to questioning of government. And so you can almost see government, like faith in government, eroding as Daniel Andrews does his daily updates and as he comes out with the next plan. So this is what agencies are feeding back to us as well, which all adds to the uncertainty and the mental health. Then what we've learned about practitioner experience, and so they are continuing to use creative strategies. So like Eleanor said, we are looking for the positives as well. Practitioners have been remarkable, like as other service providers have stepped back and not been able to do as much face-to-face, our child and family services have still been going out to visit families. They've tried to maintain that face-to-face delivery as long as possible, but where that hasn't been possible, they've looked at really creative ways of engaging. So like walk and talk, virtual home tours, which I hadn't really thought of before, but we had one Alliance collection of agencies say that they're, with their clients, they're doing this virtual home tour. So where they might have gone out previously and physically been in the house and being able to see firsthand what's happening in the home, now with a virtual tour, you can still get a sense of what the issues are, like what the health issues might be, or the hygiene issues, or the issues around needing rental assistance or rental relief. Also things like WhatsApp, like still using amazing creative ways with technology and finding what's working for particular clients, what's working for young people or for single mothers with families, or just finding what works for particular families. And it differs across regions, it differs across individual families. They're still dropping off face masks, laptops and food, like that hasn't declined. But there's also increased contact with clients that are at risk, follow-up calls, text messages, more frequent check-ins, increased case management. So that hasn't dropped off. That's actually increased with some families. And also some families that had lost contact with the agency have now come back to agencies as well. So you've got new cases coming in, you've got old cases returning, and you've got existing cases that people are managing. There's more flexibility in processes to accommodate victim survivors. A number of agencies reported that. More focus on safety planning and safety checklists that they might not necessarily have done formally, but it's front of mind now for people that are trapped in homes, and they might have just a window of opportunity to phone or to text or to message a practitioner for support. There's also increased information sharing to keep children visible. For example, our agencies, our practitioners are working with school wellbeing teams, with maternal child health nurses, with other services, making sure that children are, like that visibility is retained in a time where there's very little community oversight. But this is also another trend, and Eleanor highlighted this as well, the increased fatigue and the burnout of staff. We could see it happening in the previous wave, but it's much more pronounced now. And in some of our practice network forums, the Alliance meetings, it's very evident from the way people are speaking and reporting on their experiences that this is such a risk now for our staff. And the longer this goes on, the more we have to be concerned about the wellbeing of the practitioners who are supporting the wellbeing of our families and children. So the next slide is about the agency experience as a whole. What we're seeing, more flexible working from home arrangements, that's just increased as the pandemic has evolved. Not just setting up people to work remotely, but having more leniency around whether people are required to come into the office or not. So having more like rosters, having systems that enable people to take account of their home circumstances. So if they're doing family violence counselling, for example, or they're counselling children, making sure that the environment is safe for workers, but also safe for the families. Overt appreciation, examples of that, the multitudinous examples of this, additional paid COVID or wellbeing days off, CEOs and team managers sending out care packages or gifts to staff to thank them, thank you letters, all sorts of acknowledgement, and making sure that's coming from the top down so that people can see that their workers who are working extremely hard, long hours, can see they're being valued. Much greater emphasis by agencies on self-care, like professional development sessions, specific wellbeing policies, making sure they're updated, they're available to every staff member. A lot of virtual events, a lot of fun activities together, greater encouragement of use of EAP, agencies encouraging regular reflective practice sessions and external supervision. So really ramping up across a lot of agencies. But also CEOs, executives, management, making sure they're meeting regularly with staff to communicate, do check-ins, to update, just sharing that information internally. And a lot of agencies have reported back how much staff are appreciating that, like they're being kept in the loop about developments. And finally, just making time available for PD activities and learning. So making good use of any, the limited downtime that might be available to workers. And then the next slide, what will be sustained? Let's just see what we found. Next slide. So these are the things that are likely to be sustained into the future. And Eleanor has already pointed out some of these things, but a greater use of virtual platforms to engage with clients. Not getting rid of that entirely though, so having a good mix of face-to-face and remote service delivery and creative use of technology to engage. There are some people that are saying they much prefer the technology, and that's to do with all sorts of reasons, and others want to go back to face-to-face, others like the balance. So it's really finding out what works for particular groups and cohorts of clients. Flexible working arrangements, it's hard to see how they can change. Like they've been set in place to accommodate staff working from home. A number of people have come back and said to us, we want to keep working from home. If we go back to the office, we only want to be able to do it 2 or 3 days a week. So agencies are going to have to work out, like, how do we accommodate this new, the way it's been opened up, like remote working has opened up so many possibilities. So it's likely that we'll see more staff working from home for more of the time. Regular meetings and communication between management and staff, more information sharing. It's hard to see how that could go back to a pre-COVID norm where maybe there was a gap or there's a lack of connection between management and practitioners. We think there'll be, from what you're telling us, we think there'll be continued organisational awareness of staff wellbeing and the importance of self-care. Some of these measures that have been put in place, it's hard to see how they could be rolled back or not acknowledged anymore. And also a shift to more virtual learning PD opportunities for staff. So at the centre, we're an RTO, we had a very strong learning and development unit that was providing a range of opportunities face-to-face. We've shifted completely at the moment to online and remote learning. And it's likely that when we come out of COVID, probably next year, that we'll be having a mixture of face-to-face, but probably more remote because we've seen how successful it can be. And then the last slide, I think. And just the conclusion. So just to reiterate, like some of the points Eleanor's made as well, but this rapid data collection, it's a point of time, it's valid data in a rapidly changing dynamic environment. It can provide really useful insights into what works, and it can inform decision-making and planning. And Janelle, who's on the session today, I just wanted to thank her for this quote that she sent through this week. It's so valuable to hear about what is happening around the state while it is happening and feed that back to our local area. And so Meredith from the department and I we did a co-presentation, I think last week, it might have been last Tuesday, and people were immediately saying, can we have the slides? Because we've got meetings this week, we want to feed back this to our meetings. And we also want to feed back to like more broadly across our organisations, because this kind of data, like just reflecting that back, it gives, it's like a validation of the experiences of practitioners and agencies and clients, but it also shows what's working and what can be shared. And people were particularly interested in the wellbeing for staff, like how other organisations are managing wellbeing of staff. So the centre intends to do a bit more on that in another meeting. I think that's all. Thank you, Mandy.
Thank you so much, Eleanor and Michele. What a wealth of knowledge and information you've sort of gathered. We've got just a few minutes for a couple of questions if you wanted to either unmute yourself and ask or put something into the comment box. There is just one here waiting. Sarah Waters asked, Eleanor, are there any documents or reports available in relation to the common elements research?
Yeah, so there's I saw that one, and I was also messaging with Dakina in the meantime. So we're happy to make the rapid evaluation report is quite high level and quite summary, but we're absolutely happy to make that available plus a presentation from today. But also we have an implementation evaluation report on the common elements approach that I think is close, and I think we don't have Nicola anymore, do we? Nicola Thompson was here earlier. I'll just have to see whether that's been finalised, but we're very close to having an implementation evaluation available on that one, which we could share.
Thank you so much. That's great.
Wonderful. Lauren Johnson just wants to clarify FFT/CW for
Sorry, yeah, family functional therapy, child welfare. Apologies for acronyms. I hate them too.
They're everywhere, let's face it. One last question? There'll be another opportunity right at the end. So, okay, let's move on to the second part of the program. And now we have Andi Jones. He's going to be doing a presentation on converting residential parenting assessment and community-based parenting education services to a telehealth service model during COVID. Andi Jones is the Infant Response and Parenting Skill Development and Education COVID-19 Response Manager. That's a long title. He has over 25 years experience working in a diverse range of human services in Victoria, South Australia, the United Kingdom and Thailand. Andi is a registered nurse and holds a Bachelor of Nursing, Graduate Diploma in Mental Health Nursing, Graduate Diploma in Social Science, Masters in Health Service Management, and most recently a Masters by Research. Welcome, Andi.
Thank you very much. I'm a little technologically challenged myself, so bear with me.
You're in good company.
Yeah, you did make a safe space. I appreciated that.
I love being virtuous like that.
Can you see my slides?
Yes, all good.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm unable to.
You're all looking good.
That's very interesting because I can't see it myself.
Oh.
But that's okay. I think we'll be all right. So thank you very much for having me. These were really great presentations, and it's interesting because it was really nice to hear actually, because it fed into what some of the things that we've been experiencing. So did that change?
Yes.
Oh, good. So what I wanted to do firstly, yeah, thanks, Mandy, was just I'm actually not going to talk about Tweddle as a whole, and I'll tell you what I am going to talk about, but I just wanted to just remind of Tweddle being it's an early parenting centre, registered public hospital, and we're really looking at providing parenting support through the first critical 1,000 days. And really, I suppose what we really try and do is promote preservation, reunification, and help when there is distress and disruption in infant-parent relationships. So that's what we do as a whole. And did it change?
Yes.
Oh, good. So firstly, I really just want to acknowledge Victorians, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. And so what I want to do over the next 15 minutes, I tried to make it relatively practical. So what I thought I'd do is touch base in terms of the programs that I look after pre-COVID, what led to the change and what we did as a result of stage one and continuing, and to look at what were some of the challenges that we faced, some of the things that have worked really well, and to look at the sort of global research that we're doing at the end of this. Okay, so part of my role with a really great team, also led by Liz, Peter and Sarah, is we do a 10-day parenting assessment and skill development. We're an independent assessor, and we get our referrals from Child Protection or the Children's Court. It's a 10-day, 24/7 residential stay that uses a mixed method around assessing. It's a really quite an objective assessment, and what the outcome of that assessment, it helps Child Protection and the Children's Court establish case planning that's in the best interest of children. So that's one of the things, just keep that in your back of the mind, because that's one of the things that we had to convert to telehealth. Not easy, which I'll talk about. The other program that we did pre-COVID was the Home Parenting Education Support Service, which is we call HOPES. And so that's an 8-week in the home for a couple of times a week for a few hours, directly working with families in the environment that is theirs, not ours. And so they're the services we do from a funding perspective. The parenting assessment, we are funded through Western Child Protection, and we also do fee-for-service, whether that be New South Wales or Southern. So it's a lot of inter and intrastate fee-for-service work that we do. And the HOPES program was funded a mixture of Department of Health and Human Services, Barwon Child, Youth and Family, and fee-for-service. And that'll resonate. The reason I'm telling you that, it'll resonate in terms of what some of the challenges we face upon implementing I think it was March the 16th, if I remember rightly, when I was reading a directive from DHHS, and rightly so, where it was told PSDEs, which is the parenting assessment, where possible, needed to move to telephone contact or other digital platforms rather than in-person, face-to-face. And we needed to make every effort to continue to cite children. That'll also resonate as we go through. So once we got over the shock of all of this and was able to take some deep breaths and try and look at this a bit more pragmatically, what we did really is that we decided to put the parenting assessment and the home visiting program in the metaphorical basket, and that we knew that we didn't have time to create 2 models at this stage because we needed to do it in a hurry. So what we ended up doing by that process is that we took out the parenting assessment component, because we understood that in 48 hours you couldn't replace a 10-day 24/7 observational assessment through a telephone video and think that you're going to get the same answer, and that wasn't really fair on the people that we were going to be assessing. And we took out the home visiting component, as you would imagine. So that's how we created the Parenting Skill Development and Education Telehealth Service, which is and I just need to give the team, it's a reasonably sized team, but I really need to give Liz, Peter and Sarah an absolute plug, because we all worked really hard and continue to work hard. So the next slide is I'm not going to go through, because it's such a short time, I'm not going to go through in absolute detail, but what you're seeing on the screen is what we tried to do. So it was a 10-day residential service and an 8-week home visiting service, all around parenting, education and skill development. So we decided to create a 6-week model that was based on 4 weeks of intensive. So that was looking at 2 hours per day of direct client services and a fortnightly check with the family and the relative supports around them. And then there was a 2-week a 2-week step down. So that was 1 hour 3 times a week with future discharge planning happening within that 2 weeks. Can I just say the other thing that I'll touch on again is that we really started discharge planning at the very beginning. That's what those check-in meetings were also about. It was as we know, it's an environment where there wasn't a lot of services or schools or things happening for families. So the next part, this is just giving you a snapshot as our thought process really around when we, so like everyone else, within a day, we were packing up, driving our cars up, putting our computer screens in the car, and the next day we were all working from home. So we, as a group of people, one of the first steps we did is say, okay, what is the evidence-based frameworks we're currently using, and which ones of them we can still use in a telehealth context? Because as you can see by the slide, there, things like the depression, anxiety, stress scale, 21 we could do, Caritan, which is parenting confidence, we could do. We could do some things related to NCAS, which is about looking at the play and various activities with children. But there was also some things we couldn't do. Like you couldn't do a early communication indicator through a telephone, like video. Like there was certain things that we couldn't do. But that was the first thing we tried to do, is say, let's think about what we can keep using. The other thing that was really key is at the very beginning, we started looking at evaluation. So evaluation from everything to, and hats go off to the team, is we established, which I'll talk about in another slide, a post-service delivery survey monkey. So every time a clinician got off from that service, they did a survey, which is something that we fed back each week so that they could get a sense of what was happening for their families at this point in time. But also it was around, we needed to set up different consultation because people were working on their own. So we needed to set up processes that clinicians could consult with other clinicians because they weren't in the same room. And lots of, we set up stakeholder survey monkeys for clients when the service finished, because we were very clear that we were a bunch of really white middle class people putting together a service at a really short space of time, and we needed to seek that evaluation to see which parts we got right and which parts we needed to change. The other thing in the model is we have Sav, his name is, and he's our peer support worker who has been in a situation where he's been part of the parenting assessment and has come out the other side, and he's an integral part of both of our services. So we also needed to have him in there because that's part of engagement. It's about people seeing real people having experience and being where they are at this point in time. The other thing that we were mindful of, and we did need to do it, and we needed to be accountable for how we were going to convert our funding. So those 2 services I talked about, we needed to justify that we were converting that funding into this new model. And we had such great response around the Department of Health and Human Services. It was great. It was great in terms of informative, asked lots of questions, which were really welcome. So we managed to do that. And the other big ticket item for us was how could we keep an eye on babies and toddlers, because most services at that time, for our vulnerable kids, going to school or going to childcare or going to preschool or going to the library, they're their community members looking out for them. And all of a sudden, all of those things had either ceased or had slowed down. So what I thought I'd just break it up a bit. There's the things that worked well, and then the things that keep working well. Is the first thing, the the kids and families who want to be the best parents they can be still had services that they could connect to. It was a challenge and it required a whole lot of skills and technology, but they still had a service. The other thing that fared us really well was because we were bringing two teams together. So the first thing that we did is set up a new accountability chart, for want of a better word, and that was just, it was the best thing we did because we were really clear who was in what team, who was doing what in terms of making the model, and then how would that model implement in terms of teams. Our IT skills and knowledge of staff increased dramatically. With a little bit of kicking and screaming from people like myself, but we got there. It was all a learning curve. And I think what's working well, and it feeds into the previous presentations, which it was really, really comforting to hear, is that we're now thinking outside the square, and we're looking at, well, you know, there's a lot that went really, really well. And how do we don't want to replace what we're doing because we know that we need face-to-face, but I love the word, we're looking at an adjunct to what we do in both services now, because one service, the assessment's gone back to full operation. So we're looking at how can we use what we now know as an adjunct. And the other big what's working well is that we, through the Learning Systems grants, through the centre, which we're so grateful for, and I work with two incredibly clever women from the Murdoch Children's Research, Associate Professor Rebecca Giallo and Dr. Alison Fogarty, who are amazing, that we were already evaluating the parenting assessment program, and we were able to go back and get an ethics amendment to look at asking people about what life was like in a COVID world, and also to be able to look at doing some further evaluation on the telehealth model that we've done. So a big shout out to those clever people. And then wanting to be strength-based, but the sense of what the immediate challenges were, and it fit into both of those presentations brilliantly. We, for the first 2 or 3 weeks, four of us just worked around the clock. It's all we really did was to create this therapeutic model for children and families going from face-to-face to telehealth. And, it was about that speed of creation. Like, we were just on it. And it was enjoyable, but it was really hard work. And when you're bringing two teams together, you're working with two new teams. So there's all that dynamics that you need to move through as well. We required a lot of unexpected IT infrastructure. So if you think out of a team of probably, I'm just thinking maybe 12, 15, 4 had phones and computers. No one else had phones or computers. So while we're doing this model, this incredibly clever, beautiful woman called Barb, who is our facilities manager, she had to go loads of different places to get computers. Her son even couriered the computers and the phones and the SIM cards. She was a remarkable woman, and I think just want to say that if it wasn't for her, we wouldn't have got this up and running. And the other challenge we had is that in the midst, once she got all our computers and everything set up, unfortunately, she passed away really suddenly and found by her children. So that was just another challenge, and it's great to be able to give her a shout out. Why I'm doing this to all of you lovely people, because she worked 7 days a week, 12 hours a day to get us sorted. As I said before, bringing two teams together, it's a pleasure, but it takes time, because you've got to create your new dynamics, and you've got to get to know each other and be comfortable with the questions you're going to ask each other. Maintaining the evaluation requirements, that was a challenge. Busy people trying to do a 3 to 4 minute survey after each interaction. It was a challenge, and people did it. Lots of procedural changes. We had a new manual, we had new procedures, we had to think about how you get consent online when you can't sign, we had new referral forms, the lot. And we took on a more of a case management role, which we needed to be doing because that's what our families needed. Motivating and engaging clients, man, for all of us, it's tough if you're spending a lot of time on video, and if people aren't answering the video, or you're sitting in the Zoom and people aren't answering, and you're sending text messages and you're ringing, there was so much energy used to building trust and rapport. And managing staff and families' anxiety. And I mean that and the other presentations beautifully said it. Why we're doing all of this, we're living in a pandemic. So we've got everyone's feeling uncertain. Our sense of agency's gone, or isn't as much as it was. We're trying to juggle multiple things. And that was a challenge. The continued challenge is we've got half of us working from home, half not. And, everyone's feeling it around, online's great, but it doesn't replace the three-dimensional connection with another human being. We've also then had to modify the 6-week model to the 8-week home visiting model. So the assessment has gone back to Resi, but then we still can't do home visiting. The other continued challenge, which everyone is feeling the same, is keeping up the pace. We are quietly knackered, but we keep going because we need to keep going. But it's all of those things that people were saying. Everything from screen time, some working from home, some not. And also the IT infrastructure, the more we have, the more security becomes an issue for our programs and also Tweddle as a whole. So just to finish, what is needed going forward? So you can see here, and I won't read them all out, but that is the cleaning of the survey data. So if you think, that's probably about 70% of what we were collecting at the end of each service interaction with a client, which we use that individually to talk with clients about, it can see what we've done, what time they preferred to be called, were there any IT issues, because we needed to get onto that quickly. So what we're now doing is that we're looking at all of those surveys, is that we're going to bring them down to, we're just cleaning it up at the minute, to look at doing a global view of all of the clients that we saw, because it'll tell a really good story. For example, did you cite the child? How long did you cite the child? Why didn't you cite the child? Everything from that to, did Zoom work for you? And so within that, we're also going to be doing client file audits for a portion of the clients we saw in this service. So looking at what they needed and how well that happened. As I said before, qualitative interviews with across the board around what's life's like in an assessment such as ours and in a pandemic. And using all of that to see how we landed, but also what is it that what's the evidence we can take away that we can put in an adjunct to what we do now and what we might do in the future. So thank you very much. That was our gig.
Thank you so much, Andi. That was really interesting. And it just sort of demonstrates the challenge from so many multifaceted angles in doing the type of work that we're now in the position of having to do because of this situation. We will move straight on to Eliza, and then we'll have a little bit of time following that for questions. So people who put questions, we'll respond to them then. Eliza is delivering a paper called Shifting Anglicare's Rapid Response Program in a COVID Environment. Eliza has experience in the community service sector within NGOs and DHHS, undertaking various roles. She currently holds a position of practice lead rapid response, whereby she has supported program and practice development, implementation, fidelity, and replication of rapid response across regions. Welcome, Eliza.
Thank you. Hoping you can see my screen. It's the question of the day. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Excellent. Okay. So I'm conscious of time, so I'll try and talk a bit quicker than what I normally would. So today we're looking at the rapid response program in a COVID environment. So essentially how that has shifted. So I think it's important for us to start with a little bit of background in terms of what is rapid response for people that are not aware of what the program is. So Rapid Response, it's an evidence-based program which was designed by Anglicare Victoria. Rapid Response is a 4-week intensive placement prevention model that acts as a direct alternative to child protection intervention when a decision to remove a child from the home is imminent. So the aim of the program is to prevent children being placed in out-of-home care, and we look at providing intensive short-term supports up to 15 hours per week of face-to-face contact, and each practitioner holding a maximum of 2 families. So rapid response practitioners focus on addressing protective concerns, utilising a strengths-based approach that incorporates coaching and role modelling to build on parental strengths, their skills, their knowledge and their resources to increase the levels of safety within their home. So the primary target are children aged 0 to 16, where families are at imminent risk of a protection application by emergency care and being placed in out-of-home care. Or priority 2 is families who are case managed by child protection who are at risk of a breach to their current order and the child being placed in out-of-home care. So just to give you a little bit of, sorry, I can't see my screen, 1 second. So just to give you, I guess, a quick overview of the effectiveness of rapid response. So I'll just share this piece of information, which is just, I guess, a sneak peek, preview of the research conducted by Monash University, which we'll be releasing next month. So basically the research was undertaken, 251 families received support from rapid response, and at the end of the 4-week intervention were assessed by child protection regarding their ability to remain in the parent's care. The families visit again after 3 months after finishing the program, and again after 6 months to see if their children still remained in the care of the family or if they'd entered out-of-home care. So at completion of the program, 215 of the 251 families had their children remain in their care. And 3 months after the program completion, 207 of the 251 families were still caring for their children in their home. And at the 6-month mark, 170 of the 251 families still had their children remaining in their care. So by comparison, 42 families at risk of having their children enter the out-of-home care system, which did not participate in rapid response program, when these families were visited, only 21 from 42 families were able to remain in the care of parents. So we think that's pretty amazing results for a program that operates for just 4 weeks, but I guess it also highlights the level of support that we can provide, up to 15 hours of face-to-face contact. And we feel, obviously, by expanding rapid response, we'd be able to help many more at-risk families live safely at home. And also them not having to spend, I guess, a year sort of maybe bumping around the child protection system and also entering the out-of-home care system. So moving on to the impact of COVID-19. So essentially, what did this mean for rapid response? So after all that thinking around how could we shift and work with families and work with children and still provide that support to child protection and their identified families. So after all this thinking, a model was developed in terms of rapid in COVID. So it was looking at working with families for up to an 8-week intervention period, each practitioner holding a maximum of 4 families at any one time, and allowing them to still provide an intensive level of support, so up to 7 hours, and still, as we all know in this environment, still looking at that innovative and flexible approach and support. The referrals will continue to be received directly from child protection, and the focus of the intervention was to reduce the presenting crisis for a family and to increase the levels of safety within the home. So it's just a bit of a comparison, like a compare the pair in terms of the two programs, and essentially locations and structure remain the same across the 5 sites. Eligibility, of course, we had to, we couldn't accept families that were at imminent risk of protection application and emergency care because we weren't able to provide that level of support. We could not provide that, the intensity, the 15 hours. So it changed to children being at risk. Response time was within 2 days of referral acceptance. We ensured that we would still maintain that partnership and working relationship with child protection. We increased the service duration from 4 weeks to 8 weeks, and the caseload from 2 to 4. And in terms of service provision, as I've sort of said, rapid response looks at the 15 hours. So again, we had to be flexible and sort of, I guess, go with the shifting changes of COVID and guidelines from DHHS and Anglicare Victoria in terms of what that contact might look like with other families. So support in a remote environment. So what does this look like for rapid response? So in terms of home visits, we were still continuing on with our home visits. And look, this differs from region to region, but the visits still continued. So we're very much again being guided by DHHS and Anglicare practice guidelines and continue to adapt and change with them. So we're practicing social distancing and short time frames at the home. So we were going both inside and outside the home. So we wanted to ensure that we still had that face-to-face contact with families. So we know that face-to-face, it absolutely helps in building that rapport with families and children. So utilising the PPE equipment, so of course wearing the face masks and gloves should we be going inside the home, and utilising hand sanitising. We identified that our visits needed to be more purposeful. So our visits needed to be more to the point and really to make the most out of that contact with the families. And our questions needed to be more targeted. The home visits, still provide that level of monitoring and eyes on the children and infants, and that general assessment of how families are actually going. And I guess that's the thing with home visits. You could ask someone on the phone how they're doing, but when you're in person and seeing a family, you get that body language, or I think someone was talking about the rolling of the eyes. You get to really see how they're going. I think the politeness perhaps sometimes disappears. And also what we were doing was we're delivering the care packages as a means to really try and connect with families and to provide them with essential items. And also realising that that was really beneficial for those families that were quite tricky to engage or to catch on the phone. So it was really just about letting them know that we were still there for them. So some barriers or obstacles to the home visits. So whilst the use of PPE equipment enabled the home visits to occur, we found that there was actually the factors impacting on this was perhaps the perception or the stigma for families. So by us turning up to their home, were we thinking they have COVID? So there was already that stigma for them, but there was also the neighbours. So if we're turning up to a home in our gear, do the neighbours then think that this family or family members have COVID? So we had to think about that as well. But there was also the fear from families that maybe we have COVID. How do they know? So that was also a fear that was articulated by clients, that we might be turning up to their home and we might have COVID. So some people weren't really inclined to let us into their home. So what we did is have conversations with families prior to the visits to really talk them through and try to alleviate these concerns. And at the end of the day, if a family wasn't wanting us in their home, then that's okay, that's their choice. And then we just had to be more creative about what that looked like. What we also identified was that by wearing a mask, some kids actually found this scary. So they were quite intimidated when you turned up to the home in a mask. And also what we found is for others, it was actually having a triggering effect of current or past trauma. So the wearing of the mask. So we had to be conscious of that as well. And it was all about having conversations with the families prior to turning up at the home, sort of advising and preparing or finding other ways to, virtually see a family. Another barrier to the home visit was if a family identified as being unwell. Obviously we can't go into the home, we can't go there. And then it was, I guess, the ability to reschedule home visit was quite lengthy in time. So I guess overall we decreased the time that we're physically in the home, which impacted on some of the direct observations of the parent and parent or parent-child, and impacted, I guess, on the coaching and role modelling, which were core to the original rapid response. the use of technology and phone calls. So I guess what were we doing there? So it was all such a foreign environment, I think, for everyone, and I think we've all spoken about it, you know, using Zoom or FaceTime or Skype to have, you know, so-called home visits with family members. So, but look, it's allowed us to have the virtual visit in the home and absolutely contribute to assessments and supporting the families nonetheless. And I think from the onset, it was really about naming it with the family, saying, you know, this is kind of weird. We haven't done this before, and acknowledging that we're learning and we're still trying to do our best. But let's see what it looks like, and let's see how we go with this form. Like with the actual face-to-face home visits, we need to ensure that our virtual contacts were purposeful and focused, and preparing a plan about what we wanted to discuss and what we wanted to achieve from the session. We were capping our virtual meetings, acknowledging that they're taxing, they're tiring on everybody involved in the meeting. So again, we wanted to make sure that they were purposeful, and we weren't just having a family member on the other end of the phone or Zoom just because. So we wanted to ensure again that it was purposeful. What we're doing is basically going on virtual walks with parents. So whilst we're on the phone, we're encouraging them to actually get outdoors, get some movement, get some fresh air, and still being able to have conversations with them. I wouldn't ever encourage that to be done via Zoom or Skype, because I do know we had a lady crash into a bush because she was so preoccupied with looking at the screen and not so much on the audio. So I would mobile phone only, I think. And I guess we're still trying to ensure that we're there virtually for families at those key times, so when they need us. And so we're there to able to provide support through, you know, what might be the difficult time, so we can still do that element of coaching and role modelling, but ensuring that we're also still there at those times that are good, and so we can provide that praise and reassurance. And I think a lovely story, a very short story, was a worker who, she was working with a mum who was having difficulty in getting her little one settled at night time. So what the worker ended up doing was via Zoom on the iPad. So the mum set her up on the dressers inside the little one's room. And the worker was able to observe, I guess, the routine in terms of how mum was trying to settle her child at night. And so from that, she was still able to provide that level of coaching and that feedback and trying to support her through that process. So we were still able to do some really lovely things with parents. Barriers or obstacles. Internet connection, which we see every day, we've seen here today, just keeps dropping in and out. So, you know, acknowledging things don't always go to plan. Some of the families that we started to work with, they didn't have sort of iPads or tablets or computers. So basically it was trying to access funds through our agency or funding packages or external agencies to purchase the items. What we found was an identified impact on those from cold backgrounds or those with various forms of disabilities. So I guess there was a lot of confusion at times about how to use the technology, and at times it would end up in frustration or a disinterest in engaging and a call ending early. So I know for me, I only started using Zoom maybe about 4 months ago. I'm still really poor at it. I'm still learning at it. So I guess, you know, acknowledging that some people are going to have a lot of difficulty in using the system. And I think those potentially with a disability or from cold backgrounds, it would be quite hard. Other barriers, I guess, were in terms of the parent or child not picking up the phone. However, I guess it's still about trying to use that assertive phone engagement and keep trying to connect with the family. And sometimes it was just about sending them a text to let them know that we're about to call. Sometimes that broke down that barrier. And at the end of the day, I guess one of the obstacles we found that was parents were ultimately allowing you to see what they want you to see. So again, this came back to trying to build a rapport and opening up that level of trust that families would allow them into their home on a virtual means. The use, so contact with professionals and care teams. I don't think I've ever experienced better care teams or professional meetings in my life. I think COVID has actually shown us and demonstrated how the use of technology is fantastic in this environment. So I guess what we knew was care teams were always really important for kids and families, and even more so during COVID, because what we know is there was less eyes on children and the families with the restrictions in place, and parents are homeschooling, and other professionals and services were either ceasing contact or utilising the same contact methods as us. So given that, it was really important that the existing care team and any additional supports and services were able to communicate on a regular basis. So we've ensured their regular care team meetings are occurring via Zoom or Teams or whatever that looked like. And what we found is that those that need to be there are there. So there's no longer the barriers of travel times to get to and from the meeting. There's no more concerns in trying to find parking, which if you're going to the city is always an issue. And I guess what we know is that professionals that may have struggled to leave their office or work environment due to time constraints, or they've got back-to-back appointments, are actually able to attend now. So in terms of barriers, really all I've got for this one, what we found is the internet connections, which keep dropping in and out. But moving forward, this would absolutely be something that we would take into future practice. So this was some feedback that practitioners provided regarding the new model and how they found it. So again, this is coming from various workers across 5 regions. So what they're identifying for the strengths is it allows for regular visits and contact with families in light of the COVID restrictions. And some people are more comfortable talking on the phone. There's a lot of flexibility in terms of meeting with the families and individuals and children. It actually still does allow to provide that coaching and role modelling in real time. The level of flexibility has allowed parents, especially fathers, no offence to any fathers here, this was just a worker's comment, to communicate via places where they feel more comfortable, from in the shed or in the car. The accessibility of other professionals has increased, which has resulted in a more communicative care team. There's less travel, which we know if there's less travel, there's more time that we can spend with family members. And it's also allowed for child protection to still be present for our key meetings. Some limitations that have been identified, and it's interesting because it's less ability to role model and coach and to be there in the moment, which on the flip side, someone has actually identified that as still being a strength in terms of how they can practice and work with families. Saying less hands-on and eyes-on by relying on the phone or tablet, and at times being limited to what the family want you to see. Relying on Zoom or the phone presents some barriers to engaging with those with a disability and those that are of a cold background. People have experienced difficulties to get children to talk on the phone or via Zoom. Time to develop trust and rapport by the family takes longer. Zoom fatigue. I think everyone has faced that Zoom fatigue, and I think actually everyone's pretty much spoken about it. And so therein lies the need to ensure that we're looking after ourselves and that families are looking after themselves as well. And it was also raised around gaining signed consent for referrals. So some services require signatures, and this can delay referrals and allocation time. So essentially some families may not have computers to print out a form, so you're sending it by snail mail, or dropping it off, or organising times to pick it up. So it's not as simple, I guess, as it used to be, instead of just going there face to face and handing over a piece of paper, getting it back and shooting it off. This was some feedback that we've received from parents during this time. And for me, a really lovely one is second from the bottom. The father has said, "This program has helped me so much. I've learned that I need to be my children's parent and not their best friend, and that I'm an all right dad after all." I'm like, that's a beautiful statement from the dad. So just a few little comments there. We've got some feedback from some professionals, which I guess just validates the work that is being done, not only by the rapid response workers, but also the families as well, because we can do anything and everything, but unless we engage them, they're not going to work with us. So I think it's, both rapid response and the families have done so well during this period of time. So in summary, I guess the findings for us have indicated there is indeed a place for rapid response in a COVID environment. We have adapted our model and continued to provide a flexible and intensive support service to those families in need, and supported parents, carers and children to achieve some amazing outcomes. there are some identified restrictions to the model which prevent practitioners to undertake specific tasks and roles, those which are specific to and which underpin rapid response in its organic form. However, we continue to be creative about how we can support families achieve. So along this journey, like many others, we've learned new ways in which we can continue to work alongside parents and children that can be incorporated into our toolkit for all current and future work. Thank you.
That was really interesting, Eliza, and Andi as well. We have just a few minutes, I think. Unfortunately, my speakers were under the impression that we were finishing up at 2, but I think the invitation was actually to 2:30. So let's just spend, if you can, another 15 minutes, and then we can actually round this out properly with a few questions. If you wanted to unmute yourself or put any comments in the chat. We have had a question from Janelle for Andi. As a Child and Family Service Alliance, we are currently planning how we can immediately evaluate the client's experience of the service delivery. Andi mentioned the post-service delivery survey monkey, but I missed how often this was done. Was it the end of the 6 weeks or throughout the service? Would you like to comment further on that, Andi?
Yeah, sure. There's probably a couple of ways we were really conscious of trying to get feedback as we went. And so the three main ways, I suppose, was one is the preparation for the fortnightly check-in meeting. So that was sort of a one-on-one with clients to see what they needed to have changed or what their view was. There was also the check-in meeting, which was with other services, so that was a sort of formal place. And then at the end, we then created a survey monkey that we do for our other services, but specifically around telehealth. So they had an opportunity in an anonymous way to provide us with feedback once they were on the tail end of the survey. So, of the service rather, sort of in that 2-week step down, that's when we would be offering that feedback. But it was anonymous, so that we tried to, with that power imbalance, we wanted to capture what they really thought. So they were the 2 ways. The other surveys we collected was related to our view of how things went and what we had done. Does that answer it?
Is that any further comment, Janelle? Any further query?
Sorry, I was just trying to unmute. Yes, that's great. Thank you.
And we also have a number of people for the presenters asking if it's okay to share resources that were mentioned, and I thought I might just ask that so everyone could hear the response.
Yeah.
Would that be okay? Your presentation, sharing your presentations?
Absolutely. And happy to make contact if there's anything specific.
Great. We've had Pam Jackson saying thank you very much. It's really interesting, and she has to sign off. So there you go. We've had a few people sign off, but that's reasonable. Kate is interested in survey methodology and questions. Are they able to be shared? Yeah, sure.
Happy if flick me an email or give me a buzz. Yeah, very happy. Yeah.
That's a good. Yeah, often the wording around surveys can be tricky as well. So it's really good illustrations.
Yeah, and why reinvent the wheel? We're very happy. You can use any parts that, if it's going to help clients, very happy.
Yeah, Kate says, yes, wording is important and you can get really stuck. Is there any other thoughts people have, or even just their own comments? Comparing with their own practices?
I just wanted to also ask, if the speakers are happy for us to share the email addresses for all the speakers, then people can directly get in touch.
Yeah, I am.
Brilliant, brilliant, thanks.
Actually, it's Jennifer Webber from the Caroline Chisholm Society. I just have a question for the presenters with regard to the technology. as to what platform, telehealth platform are you using? Because we're using Health Direct at the moment. As a community service, we've got access to that until the end of September, and we're not too sure what's going to happen beyond that, if it's going to be freely available or not. But I'm just curious to know what platforms those agencies were using.
I'm happy to share with us. What you're using is what we're aiming for. For the speed, we started with Zoom with clients, and then all of the meetings and where we involved other professionals, we used Teams, because Zoom was not ideal, but it was about getting something going. And we've got relatively good cybersecurity, well, very good cybersecurity, but that's a shifting piece. That's where we're looking to move to that as well.
Did you want to comment on the tech that you used?
I think, Mandy, you asked Eliza.
I did. I thought so. Eliza, yeah, she's
Sorry.
just getting it. It just takes a moment, doesn't it?
So what tech are we using?
Yeah, I just wanted to know what technology you use for your sort of system approach.
So we've been using Zoom, more so Zoom with families, or we've been using Teams as well, tending probably more so to stay away from Skype. And I think that was again around the security. So we've really been using those two forms.
I think that for us the challenge has been around, because we're using Zoom and Teams for the professional networks, the challenge has been for families, particularly for women where they've been in family violence and the perpetrator is still in the home, that some of those other connections have been very challenging because of the way that their technology is interconnected with address books and contact lists with mobile devices. So hence why we've been persevering with the Health Direct platform, but it remains a bit of an issue with regard to on the family violence front.
I would concur with that. I think that, and that was in the first presentation, I think, where in terms of mental health assessments and family violence assessments, we didn't nail that at all, because I don't know how you do in an environment where the whole household, we had environments where the whole household is together all of the time and they share a device. So yeah, I think that's one of that was beautifully, I think, illustrated, wasn't it, at the beginning in the, because that, yeah, we found that a real struggle, to be honest.
Eleanor, did you want to make a further comment about that from your research?
Look, that's one I don't have a good close read on, but I'm happy to follow up afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, even somebody in the audience, if somebody has a alternative or if somebody tried to explore it, I'd love to hear that. If anybody wants to raise up their hand.
Hi, it's Julie Brooks here from City of Greater Geelong. I haven't had a direct experience, but I was at a meeting where an agency was talking about trying to provide some prepaid mobile phones to women so that they would have some possible autonomy to engage in calls. But I don't have any evidence of whether that was successful or not to pass on, but that was I do recall that coming up at a meeting.
And that was good. Yes, we did that too. We offered mobile phones, but in one particular case I can think of, the reality is it was a mutual mobile phone. Like, yeah, it wasn't, you know, when you look at the dynamics, it wasn't able to be hidden.
And it, you know, it's that raised suspicion that puts more stress in the environment too. So
absolutely.
It's very difficult, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Anybody else would like to comment?
Or even refer to your own your own experiences, because I think this is a journey that many in the sector are taking at different stages and in different ways. So feel free to compare and contrast your own experiences with these things and your insights.
I think, as Andi aptly described before, we're all pretty knackered, quite frankly, with having to use the technology ourselves. So sort of take the silence, not as a sort of an offence, but that we're certainly taking it all in. But I think we are all starting to feel it, quite frankly. But I've really appreciated the presentations today. They've helped to sort of clarify as we work through some of these issues as well, you know, trying to work remotely and support parents. So thank you. But yeah, that sense of being knackered is coming through.
Thank you so much for that, Jennifer. And I certainly know, I mean, even a 2-hour period like this, you do start to feel a little bit wilted, like a flower that needs a bit more water. So, so maybe we take that moment to wind up. Thank you for everyone who's presented today, all volunteers, putting up their hands to participate and share their insights. So it was really interesting to have those different perspectives. Really great to keep this conversation going as well. I mean, we have, as Michele commented, we've sort of done the first wave, and as we're going through this process, things are changing and the nuances become more apparent, and where people are with this new state of being changes. And the things we thought we know, we don't know anymore as people's expectations and concerns change. So it's really good to keep revisiting this. I was going to say, we are really interested in supporting the sector in building their evidence. So if anyone is interested in trying to introduce or get fresh eyes on their evidence creation in relation to remote delivery, we're really happy to help with that as well. And the last thing, what's happening in Open at the moment, is Dakina and I and Michele are planning our Open Symposium, which is an annual event. But this year it will be virtual, of course, so hopefully I won't muck up my screen sharing in the first instance, so sorry about that, and we won't have dropouts. We're having a week-long program of presentations and workshops at the end of October. So we've just put out, we've started to advertise it, and seeking expressions of interest for those who might want to present a paper during that forum. So feel free to contact us. The information will come out via our Open News, so you can subscribe online or via Sector Buzz, and there'll be a number of other avenues as well. So feel free. I just had to put that last plug in because it would be great to have lots of faces there. Thank you once again to wonderful presenters, Eleanor for stepping in at the 11th hour, and Michele also for squeezing in amongst a whole day's event, Andi and Eliza for volunteering and just having a go at it. So that was really interesting what you all talked about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Lovely to see so many faces.